Hey everyone, it's already time for my September TBR. And you might think that because I finished my August TBR very earlier in the month, I'm going to make this one longer. But I'm actually not going to do that. And I really liked having a small TBR in August, and didn't feel like I had to constantly think about how many books I still had left to read before the end of the month. There was less pressure, and I could just enjoy the books I was reading. So I'm keeping the same number of books for September. The only problem is that these books are actually quite a bit longer. In fact, I think September might end up being a much bigger reading month in terms of pages, even though I'm only planning to still read 3 books. So let's get into what I'm planning to read. And the first book on my September TBR is The Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien. And this one is part of a group read organized by Tim from the channel Secret Fire Books. And they're going through the whole of Middle-earth. And Austin from Eternal Reading also asked me to join them. And I've actually already read the Lord of the Rings trilogy earlier this year. I also did that as part of a read-along. And I really enjoyed finally going through the entire trilogy again. Now, because I had only just finished Lord of the Rings, I didn't really feel like immediately reading it again as part of another read-along. But The Silmarillion is different. It's a book I've been interested in for a while now, mostly because of how much history and background it contains. The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings gives you a relatively small part of the history of Middle-earth. And Silmarillion goes much further back and tells the stories of the earlier ages. So instead of following one main adventure like Lord of the Rings, we're getting much more of history of the world Tolkien created. And that is one of the things I'm most interested in. I've heard quite a few people say that the Silmarillion is a difficult book to read. It doesn't have the same straightforward narrative structure as The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings. And there are a lot of names, places and different characters to keep track of. And that does make me a little curious about how I'm going to get on with it. But I'm not particularly worried about it. If Austin can understand it, I'm not expecting too many problems. But jokes aside, I'm also not planning to rush through it. I think that would probably be the wrong way to approach this book anyway. Instead, I'm going to spread it out over the entire month. I'll read a little bit at a time, let the information sink in, and hopefully enjoy it more that way. And if I get confused by all the names, I'm sure I'm not going to be the only one. Now I'm actually quite excited to finally read this one. I've read quite a bit of Tolkien already, but I've never properly sat down and read the Silmarillion. And so September seems like a good time to finally do it. And next up is The Four Game by Lewis McMaster Biold. This is the 6th book in the Verkozen saga in publication order, and it's the 5th one chronologically. And I've been working my way through the series in publication order, and it's been one of the more interesting series I've started this year. And one of the things I like about the Verkozen books is that they can feel quite different from one another. They're not all simply doing the exact same thing with the same characters and setting. And now we're getting back to Miles. And from what I understand, the 4 game is something of a sequel to The Warrior's Apprentice. which means we're going back to teenage Miles as the main character. I'm not going to pretend that I'm completely excited about it. I didn't dislike The Warrior's Apprentice, uh, but Miles as a teenager wasn't my favorite version of the character. I, I actually enjoyed him more in Brothers in Arms. And by that point, Miles is already in his 20s, and I thought he was a more mature and interesting character. He still has a lot of the ridiculous energy and determination that makes Miles entertaining, but he felt a little less like a kid, constantly trying to prove himself. So going back to Teenage Miles is probably my biggest hesitation with this book. But at the same time, I'm interested to see what Burial does with him this time. The previous books have made it pretty clear that Miles is a character who can get himself into some absolutely ridiculous situations. So even if I'm not particularly looking forward to Miles as a character, I'm expecting the story itself to be entertaining. And one advantage this book has, compared to with the other books on this TBR, is that it's not particularly intimidating in terms of length. The Foucauldian books have also generally been very easy for me to get through. They're fast paced, the plots move quickly, and we all doesn't spend hundreds of pages describing every little detail of the world. So I suspect this will probably be the book I can get through the fastest this month. And I'm also curious to see where the overall series goes from here. I've now read enough of the Foucauldian saga to have a pretty good idea of what I like about it, and I'm looking forward to continuing through the series. And so hopefully the 4 game can change my mind a little bit about teenager Miles. And then finally we have the big one. There's no more delaying it. I'm finally starting The Wheel of Time. And the first book is The Eye of the World by Robert Jordan. Now I've been putting this series off for quite a while, but eventually you reach the point where you just have to start it. The Wheel of Time is one of the biggest fantasy series out there. I believe there are 14 main books, and also a prequel. And they're not exactly short books either. So starting the series is a pretty serious commitment. And the first book is already very long. But despite that, I'm actually really looking forward to it. Now I've heard a lot about the Wheel of Time for years. It's one of those fantasy series that people constantly talk about here on BookTube when they talk about big epic fantasy series. It's also one of those series where I've heard very different opinions. Some people absolutely love it and consider it one of the greatest fantasy series ever written. And other people struggle with it more, especially the pacing in some of the later books. Now obviously I'm going to have to find it out for myself. I also know that The Eye of the World is often compared to The Fellowship of the Ring. And I can already see why. From what I know about the story, the beginning has quite a few elements that feel familiar to anyone who has read The Lord of the Rings. You have a group of characters leaving their home, a mysterious threat, and the sense that something much bigger is happening in the world around them. And I'm not necessarily bothered by that. Fantasy is full of books that take inspiration from Tolkien. And I think it's more important to see what Jordan does with those ideas himself. And I'm hoping that as the book continues, and especially the series continues, it starts to develop its own identity. Because that's one of the main things I'm interested in finding out. Does the Wheel of Time actually bring something new to the table? and I feel I've read a lot of fantasy at this point, including quite a few books that were heavily influenced by Tolkien. So I'm curious to see what it feels like to read one of the series that became such a major influence on modern epic fantasy. And I'm not putting any pressure on myself to actually finish this book this month. And that's not a reason I'm only putting 3 books on my TBR. If I try to plan out several other books on top of this, I probably end up feeling like I have to rush through The Eye of the World just to keep up with my own TBR. And I'd rather take my time. If I finish it in September, that's great, but if I don't, that's fine too. The most important thing is that I finally start The Wheel of Time. So, those are my 3 books for September. The Silmarillion by Tolkien, The 4 Game by Behold, and The Eye of the World by Robert Jordan. Only 3 books, which might not sound like a particularly ambitious TBR, but when you actually look at the size of these books, it's a different story. I'm starting one of the biggest fantasy series ever written. I'm reading one of Tolkien's most challenging books, and I'm continuing one of the biggest science fiction series on my TBR. So I think 3 books is more than enough. And that's actually something I want to continue doing. I really enjoyed having a small TBR in August, and finishing my TBR actually felt really great. But I think the bigger benefit was that I never felt like I was racing against the clock. I could read at my own pace, and I wanted to spend more time on a particular book I could. And that's especially important for the Silmarillion. I don't want to rush through a book like that just so I can say I finished it before the end of September. And the same goes for The Eye of the World. This is the beginning of a very long journey, so there's not really no point in trying to rush it. That's the plan for September. 3 books, but 3 very large books. And let's see how far I actually can get. Anyway, that's all I have. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again in the next video.